In the quiet chambers of existence where all striving eventually grows silent, there comes a wisdom that cannot be spoken, only realized. It is the wisdom of stillness, the diamond mind that neither breaks under pressure nor clings to what is passing. This stillness is not escape, it is awakening. Life moves like a river with no pause, carrying joys and sorrows in the same current. We grasp at moments, believing them to be ours, yet they slip through our hands like mist at dawn. In youth, we chase the world as if it were a treasure meant to be captured. In age, we begin to understand that everything captured was never truly ours to hold. The diamond mind is not formed in comfort. It is forged in the gentle fires of impermanence. Every loss that was endured without bitterness, every joy that was loved without possession, every pain that was witnessed without hatred, these become the facets of clarity. Just as a diamond gains brilliance under pressure, so too does awareness become radiant when life presses upon it. Comes a point when the outer noise of life no longer satisfies. Desires once loud become faint echoes. The need to prove, to gather, to outrun time begins to loosen its grip. In that softening, a doorway appears, the final doorway that every being will one day stand before. It is not a punishment, it is a passage. And what matters most at that threshold is not what has been collected, but what has been understood. To find stillness in the face of that doorway is the highest courage. It is the courage to meet life without resistance, to meet death without fear, and to meet oneself without illusion. For what is fear but the mind clinging to what it cannot keep? And what is peace but the recognition that nothing was ever meant to be kept? The diamond mind does not deny sorrow, nor does it chase eternal pleasure. It sees both as passing reflections on the surface of awareness. When grief arises, it is held gently, like rain resting on still water. When joy arises, it is allowed to shine fully without grasping. In this balance, life becomes neither heavy nor hollow. As the final doorway draws near, the restless questions of existence begin to dissolve. Who am I? What have I achieved? What remains? These questions, once urgent, soften into silence. And in that silence, something vast is revealed, not as an answer, but as presence itself. It is here that the diamond mind rests fully. No longer fragmented by longing, no longer scattered by regret, it becomes clear, spacious, unshaken. There is no need to hold on to life, for life is seen as already complete in every moment it has offered. And so, the final step is not a fall into darkness, but a release into clarity. Not an ending to be feared, but a return to what was never lost. In that realization, the doorway is no longer a boundary, it is a mirror reflecting the truth that was always present. Stillness is not the absence of life, it is the deepest expression of it. Impermanence of life, everything in life is temporary, joys, sorrows, achievements and losses, nothing can truly be possessed or held forever. Life unfolds like a vast unbroken stream where every moment is both arrival and departure. Nothing stands still, though the mind often wishes it would. We build meanings, identities and stories upon shifting ground, hoping they will give us permanence in a world that offers none. Yet from the first breath to the last, everything is in motion, subtle, continuous, and beyond control. A thought arises and fades before it can be fully grasped. A feeling blooms in the heart and dissolves without warning. Even the sense of self is not a fixed object but a flow of changing impressions, memories and perceptions stitched together by habit. When this is not seen clearly, life becomes a struggle against what it already is. We resist change, we cling to what is passing, and in that resistance, suffering is born. But when the nature of impermanence is understood deeply, not just as an idea but as a lived truth, something remarkable begins to soften within. The grip of control loosens. The urgency to secure life against its natural flow begins to fade. One starts to realize that what was always slipping away was never truly possessed in the first place. This recognition does not lead to despair, rather. It opens a quiet space where acceptance can grow. In that space, even pain becomes more bearable because it is no longer fought against. Joy becomes purer because it is no longer demanded to last. Each experience is allowed to be what it is without being forced to become something permanent. The heart begins to rest in a different kind of strength, one that does not depend on holding or resisting, but on simply being present. There is a subtle freedom in no longer needing life to be other than it is. The river of existence continues to flow, yet one no longer tries to stop it. Instead, one learns to move with it, to recognize that even the movement itself is not separate from awareness. In this understanding, fear begins to lose its foundation, for fear relies on the belief that something can be secured or lost forever. When that belief dissolves, fear has nowhere solid to stand. What remains is a quiet clarity that does not depend on circumstances. This clarity does not reject the world, nor does it escape it. It sees the world as it is, ever-changing and complete in each moment of its unfolding. In such seeing, life becomes less of a burden to carry and more of a process to witness. And in witnessing, there is a stillness that is not separate from movement, a peace that does not depend on outcome, and a depth that is always present beneath the surface of all things. Formation of the diamond mind. True inner clarity is developed through life's pressures, where suffering, joy, and change refine awareness into strength and wisdom. Everything in this life moves with the rhythm of change, and nothing remains fixed, no matter how firmly the mind wishes to hold it. What is born must shift, and what is gathered must one day be released. This is the quiet law that governs all experience. A flower blooms with great beauty, yet it does not resist its fading. The river flows without asking the mountain to stay unchanged. In the same way, human life unfolds in moments that appear solid but are already dissolving as they arise. When we look closely, even the breath we take is not the same from one instant to the next it arrives. It fulfills its purpose and it leaves without announcement. Yet the mind, unaware of this constant motion, tries to anchor itself in people, objects, memories, and identities, believing they will provide lasting security. This creates suffering because what is changing cannot be held still. A hand that clings tightly to water will always find emptiness. But a hand that remains open allows life to pass through without injury. When joy appears, it is like sunlight on a morning lake, bright but fleeting. When sorrow arrives, it is like passing clouds that also refuse to remain forever. Understanding this does not make life cold or distant, rather. It brings a deep tenderness toward all experiences. One begins to see each moment as unrepeatable, worthy of respect but not possession. In this awareness, fear begins to loosen its grip, because fear is born from the illusion that something can be permanently lost or permanently kept. But when nothing is truly permanent, loss and gain lose their sharp edge. What remains is presence, clear, open, and unburdened. Living in this way does not mean withdrawing from the world, it means engaging with it fully, yet without chains. One loves more deeply because love is no longer a transaction of holding but a practice of witnessing. One grieves more gently because grief is no longer resistance but understanding. And slowly the heart learns that freedom was never found in controlling life, but in moving with it like wind moving through open space, untouched yet fully present. The diamond mind is not something given, it is something shaped through the meeting of experience and awareness. Just as carbon under immense pressure transforms into a form that can reflect light without distortion, so too does the mind, when it endures the pressures of life with awareness, begin to reveal its clarity. Every challenge, every disappointment, every moment of confusion becomes part of this shaping process. Without resistance, pressure becomes transformation. Without awareness, pressure becomes suffering. The difference lies not in what happens, but in how it is met. When anger arises and is not blindly acted upon, it begins to lose its force. When sorrow is observed without being swallowed by it, it begins to soften into understanding. When desire appears and is seen clearly, it no longer binds as tightly as before. Over time, these moments of conscious witnessing refine the inner landscape. The scattered nature of thought begins to settle like dust falling to the bottom of still water. What emerges is a mind that is not easily shaken, not because life has become easier, but because identification with every passing wave has weakened. This is the beginning of true strength, not the strength that dominates, but the strength that remains steady in all conditions. Such a mind does not reject life's difficulties, it uses them as material for awakening. Even failure becomes instruction, even loss becomes insight. In this way, nothing is wasted. Everything becomes part of refinement. Gradually, the mind stops dividing experience into acceptable and unacceptable. It begins to see all things as movements within a single field of awareness. And in this recognition, a quiet brilliance emerges, not of brilliance that seeks attention, but of clarity that simply is. This is the diamond mind, unbreakable not because it avoids pressure, but because it has learned to become transparent within it. Letting go of attachment, peace arises when the mind releases the need to control, own, or cling to experiences, people, and outcomes. There comes a moment in the unfolding of life when the noise of striving begins to lose its authority. What once felt urgent achievement, recognition, possession gradually reveals itself as passing movement on the surface of a much deeper stillness. The world does not become less active, but the inner relationship to it begins to change. One starts to see that every pursuit, no matter how noble or necessary, eventually returns to silence. The body grows, ages, weakens, and returns to the elements from which it came. Thoughts arise, build entire worlds, and then dissolve without leaving a trace. Even the most carefully constructed identity cannot escape this rhythm of appearing and disappearing. In this recognition, a quiet turning begins within consciousness itself. The mind, once outwardly scattered, begins to look back toward its own source as if remembering something long forgotten. It is not a dramatic shift, but a subtle reorientation from chasing life to understanding it. The more deeply this is seen, the less compelling the outer chase becomes. This is not rejection of life, but a soft disinterest in illusion. The need to constantly define oneself through outcomes weakens, and a more spacious awareness begins to emerge. Within this space, everything is allowed to exist without being seized. Joy is welcome but not bound, pain is felt but not resisted. Moments pass through like wind through open gates. And in this openness, a different kind of intelligence becomes available, one that does not react blindly but responds with clarity. As this understanding deepens, the idea of a final doorway begins to take on a different meaning. It is no longer seen as an enemy or an ending to be feared, but as the natural culmination of all that has been lived. Just as every wave returns to the ocean, every form eventually returns to formlessness. The body, which once felt so central, is recognized as part of a larger process of nature, borrowed for a time and then gently released. In this recognition, resistance to impermanence begins to dissolve. What remains is a profound simplicity. Life is happening and it cannot be held. The final doorway is not a rupture in existence, but a continuation of it, a passage from visible form back into the unseen depth from which all forms arise. When seen through the clarity of a quiet mind, this passage loses its terror. Fear is sustained by the belief in separation, by the idea that something essential will be lost forever. But when awareness rests in its own stillness, it begins to sense that nothing essential can truly be lost. Only appearances change, the underlying presence remains untouched. In this way, the diamond-like clarity of mind reveals itself not at the end of life, but in how life is understood while it is being lived. Each moment becomes complete in itself, requiring nothing beyond its own unfolding. There is a deep dignity in this simplicity, a freedom that does not depend on circumstances being favorable. Even the thought of ending no longer disturbs the heart in the same way, because what is real is not threatened by transition. The body may return to dust, but the awareness that witnessed its entire journey was never confined to it. In this recognition, the final doorway is seen not as a collapse into nothingness, but as a release from all that was never truly solid. And in that release, there is a stillness so complete that it cannot be disturbed, because it is not dependent on anything arising or falling away. Stillness at life's final doorway, facing mortality with acceptance and courage, reveals that death is not an end to fear, but a transition beyond illusion. As understanding deepens, life is no longer approached as a problem to be solved, but as a process to be witnessed. And the mind, which once tried to shape reality according to desire and fear, begins to soften its grip. It becomes clear that much of human suffering comes not from life itself, but from the constant resistance to its natural unfolding. We want permanence in a world built entirely on change. We want certainty in a reality that thrives on movement. We want to hold what is already in the process of dissolving. This inner contradiction creates tension, and that tension becomes the background of suffering. Yet when attention turns inward with honesty, a simple truth begins to reveal itself. Nothing that appears can remain, and nothing that remains unchanged can be found. Even the sense of being a separate doer begins to feel less solid. Actions happen, thoughts arise, emotions flow, but the idea of a fixed controller behind them starts to fade under careful observation. What remains is a field of experience unfolding moment by moment without center or boundary. In this unfolding, awareness becomes less reactive and more spacious. Instead of immediately grasping or rejecting, there is a growing capacity to simply see. This seeing is not cold or detached, it is intimate and alive. When anger arises, it is noticed as energy taking form. When sadness appears, it is recognized as movement within consciousness. When joy arises, it is felt fully without the need to extend it beyond its natural lifespan. In this way, each experience is allowed to complete itself without interference. The mind is no longer constantly editing reality according to preference. As this habit of interference weakens, a quiet intelligence begins to surface, one that responds to life with clarity rather than compulsion. Decisions become less burdened, actions become more precise, and inner conflict gradually loses its intensity. At this stage, even the idea of loss begins to transform. What is lost was never truly owned, and what departs was never separate from the flow of existence. Relationships, possessions, roles, and identities are seen as temporary arrangements within a much larger continuity. This does not diminish their meaning, rather it frees them from heaviness. Love becomes less about possession and more about presence. Connection becomes less about holding and more about sharing a moment of existence. There is a growing recognition that nothing in life is actually fixed, including the one who experiences it all. As this clarity matures, the approach toward the inevitable end of bodily life also changes. The final doorway is no longer imagined as a sharp boundary between existence and non-existence, but as a natural transition within the same unfolding reality. Just as night follows day without breaking the continuity of time, so too does the end of form follow the arc of life without breaking the continuity of awareness. Fear begins to lose its intensity because it depends on separation, and separation is seen more and more as an assumption rather than an absolute truth. In this understanding, life becomes remarkably simple. There is breathing, seeing, feeling, and responding, all happening within a vast stillness that does not demand control. The mind, once restless and divided, begins to settle into that stillness not by force but by recognition. It sees that what it has been seeking through endless effort was never absent, and in that recognition the urgency to become something else fades. What remains is a quiet presence that does not cling to beginnings or endings because it is already whole within the flow of both. Realization of inner presence. In deep stillness, questions and identity dissolve, revealing a vast, unshaken awareness that was always present beneath life's changes. As the journey of understanding reaches its deeper layers, even the idea of a self begins to appear less like a solid entity and more like a passing arrangement of experience. What was once assumed to be a fixed center in I that thinks, chooses, and controls starts to dissolve under steady observation. Thoughts arise without invitation, emotions shift without permission, and perceptions change according to countless conditions beyond personal control. In seeing this clearly, the mind begins to recognize that it has been identifying with a stream of events rather than an unchanging core. This recognition is not intellectual alone, it is felt directly in the quiet spaces between thoughts. In those spaces there is no boundary that can be located as the true owner of experience. There is simply awareness, open and unclaimed, within which all appearances arise and fade. With this insight, the need to defend or define oneself begins to weaken. Much of human tension comes from protecting an imagined identity, trying to preserve an image that is constantly shifting anyway. When this effort is seen for what it is, a deep relaxation becomes possible. Life no longer feels like a constant test of worthiness. Instead, it becomes a field of unfolding moments where nothing needs to be permanently secured. This does not lead to passivity, rather, it allows action to become more natural and unforced. Decisions arise from clarity rather than anxiety, and responses come from awareness rather than habit. There is a sense of moving with life rather than struggling against it. In this softened state of being, even relationships take on a different quality. Others are no longer viewed through the lens of possession or expectation, but as expressions of the same changing reality. Each person is a flowing process, just as one's own experience is a flowing process. When this is understood, connection becomes freer and more honest. Love is no longer burdened with demands for permanence. It becomes a shared presence that honors impermanence rather than resisting it. This kind of love does not diminish with change, it deepens because it is no longer based on illusion. As awareness continues to settle into this understanding, the concept of time itself begins to feel less rigid. The past is seen as memory arising now and the future as imagination appearing now. Only this present unfolding is ever directly experienced. In this directness there is a simplicity that cannot be captured by thought. The mind, when not chasing what has passed or what has not yet arrived, finds a natural restfulness in the immediacy of experience. Life becomes less about reaching a destination and more about recognizing what is already here. Even the idea of the final departure of the body loses its heaviness in this light. What once appeared as a dramatic ending is now understood as part of the same continuous movement that has always been present. Forms arise, exist for a time, and return to the elements from which they emerged. This rhythm is not personal, it is universal. In seeing this, fear gradually loosens its hold. What is unknown is no longer seen as threatening, but simply as ungraspable by thought. In the end, what remains is not a conclusion but a clarity, a quiet recognition that nothing essential was ever truly separate or lost. Life continues in its changing expressions, yet beneath all expression there is a stillness that does not move or age or divide itself, and in that stillness everything is already complete without needing to become anything else.